When the human body performs heavy labor, it generates massive amounts of internal metabolic heat. If the surrounding environment prevents that heat from dissipating, the body enters thermal overload. It is a quiet, invisible biological collapse that often begins before the worker even realizes they are in danger. In California, where extreme heat waves routinely push temperatures well above historical averages, a standard construction site or enclosed warehouse can quickly become a life-threatening environment. Health, safety, and environment professionals maintain the absolute floor of human survival, where strict regulatory adherence dictates the physical viability of a workforce. The agencies enforcing this baseline, the Department of Industrial Relations and Cal OSHA, operate the most aggressive thermal stress regulatory framework in the world. A true safety professional must engineer a site culture where workers are legally protected and culturally encouraged to seek cooling long before the physical symptoms of heat stress appear. Under the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970, California maintains a unique state plan status. This jurisdictional sovereignty allows the state to enforce workplace safety standards that frequently exceed the baseline mandates set by the federal government. This authority covers almost every private and public sector employee in the state, but there are specific enclaves where Cal OSHA has no jurisdiction. Federal employees, workers on exclusive federal land, and staff of the United States Postal Service remain strictly under federal oversight. For the millions of workers under state protection, thermal safety is governed by two foundational pillars of the California Code of Regulations: Title 8, Section 3395 for outdoor places of employment, and the newly enacted Section 3396 for indoor environments. These requirements are so comprehensive that federal OSHA is currently using the California framework as the blueprint for its own developing national heat rules. In California, safety compliance functions as a legally binding escalation matrix, where precise environmental thresholds trigger mandatory cascading protective actions. The escalation begins outdoors. When the ambient temperature hits 80 degrees Fahrenheit, California law officially activates Section 3395, initiating 4 strict compliance pillars. First is the hydration mandate. Employers must provide access to potable drinking water that is fresh, pure, and suitably cool. The volume is strictly codified, 1 quart per employee per hour for the entire shift, located as close as practicable to the work area. Second is the shade mandate. At 80 degrees, shade must be physically present and large enough to accommodate all employees on a rest break, allowing them to sit in a normal posture without touching each other. Inspectors actively look for citation traps here. A static vehicle sitting in the sun or a structure without ventilation does not legally qualify as shade. It must actually block direct sunlight and allow for the dissipation of body heat. Third is the rest mandate. Whenever an employee requests it, they have a legally protected right to take a preventative cool-down rest period for a minimum of 5 minutes to recover from thermal stress. Fourth is the training requirement. Supervisory and non-supervisory staff must receive mandatory instruction on environmental risk factors and emergency protocols before they are ever exposed to a high-heat environment. Cal OSHA defines access strictly by physical proximity. A water station a 10-minute walk away or shade that requires leaving the site is considered non-compliant. Theoretical safety measures offer no legal defense. The hazard is not confined to direct sunlight. In enclosed environments like warehouses and manufacturing plants, restricted airflow and radiant heat from machinery trap humidity, creating distinct physiological risks. This is governed by the 2024 Indoor Heat Standard, Section 3396. When an indoor workspace reaches 82 degrees Fahrenheit, employers are required to implement written procedures, provide water, and ensure access to dedicated cool-down areas maintained below 82 degrees. The legal requirements escalate sharply if the temperature or the heat index reaches 87 degrees. Passive measures are no longer sufficient. At this threshold, a use of engineering controls, such as cooling mist fans, air conditioning, or local exhaust ventilation, becomes mandatory to lower the temperature. If engineering controls are exhausted and the heat index remains at or above 87 degrees, the employer must implement administrative controls. This means rotating employees, reducing work intensity, or shifting work schedules to cooler parts of the day. When both engineering and administrative controls fail to eliminate the hazard, The final tier of protection requires issuing personal heat protective equipment, like water-cooled garments or cooling vests. Indoor compliance mandates a mastery of environmental engineering to mitigate the combined hazards of ambient temperature, high humidity, and restricted airflow. Returning to the outdoors, the escalation matrix peaks at 95 degrees Fahrenheit. In specific high-hazard industries like construction, landscaping, and agriculture, solitary labor becomes a massive liability. At this temperature, employers must activate formal high-heat procedures. This includes mandatory pre-shift meetings to review heat safety, establishing constant communication protocols, and implementing a mandatory buddy system to monitor workers for signs of cognitive decline. For agricultural operations, the law demands even tighter intervention. When the temperature hits 95 degrees, agricultural employers must ensure that every worker takes a minimum 10-minute preventative cool-down rest period every 2 hours. The standard also requires designating specific employees on each worksite who are explicitly authorized to call emergency medical services if a worker collapses. At 95 degrees, passive safety measures fail. Active, documented observation is the only legal way to intercept a fatal heat stroke incident before the body shuts down. The data on thermal fatalities reveals a clear pattern. A significant majority of heat-related deaths occur during a worker's first week on the job. The human body is simply not physiologically prepared to handle sudden thermal loads without gradual exposure. This biological adaptation process is called acclimatization. OSHA recognizes this medical reality and enforces it through mandatory observation periods. Any employee newly assigned to a high-heat area must be closely observed by a supervisor or a designated buddy for the first 14 days of their employment. This identical observation mandate applies to all workers during a sudden heat wave. Acclimatization protocols require managers to treat unadapted employees as biologically vulnerable. It translates an involuntary medical process into a trackable, enforceable legal mandate. When preventative measures fail, thermal stress presents in two distinct clinical stages. Heat exhaustion is a severe physiological warning. Heat stroke is a fatal medical emergency where the central nervous system collapses. Heat exhaustion manifests through heavy sweating, painful muscle cramps, nausea, and dizziness. The immediate response is to move the affected worker to a cool-down area, provide hydration, and restrict them from returning to work until all symptoms have abated. Heat stroke is characterized by a cessation of sweating. The skin becomes hot and dry. The worker will exhibit confusion, disorientation, or lose consciousness completely. This requires an immediate 911 call and aggressive, rapid cooling while awaiting paramedics. For the HSE professional, recognizing the clinical difference between exhaustion and stroke dictates whether you are filling out a first aid log or reporting a workplace fatality to OSHA within 8 hours. Navigating this regulatory matrix requires a Heat Illness Prevention Plan, or HIP. By law, this plan must be a site-specific operational blueprint tailored to the exact conditions of your facility, not a generic document. OSHA has explicitly warned that a plan consisting of copy-pasted safety orders is an automatic failure during an inspection. During an enforcement visit, verifiable documentation is your only shield. Comprehensive training records, acclimatization tracking, and daily observation logs are what protect an organization from serious or willful citation classifications. The HIP operates beneath the broader Injury and Illness Prevention Program, or IIPP. This is the umbrella standard under which all hazard identification and correction procedures are legally evaluated by state inspectors, and the system relies on the workforce. Employees have the right to refuse imminent hazards and report violations anonymously, supported by strict whistleblower protections enforced by the Division of Labor Standards Enforcement. Evaluate your team's cool-down areas and hydration stations today. Tell us your specific cooling strategies in the comments below. Precise safety documentation establishes the operational standard for survival, ensuring that every worker on a site returns home alive. If you want to learn more about workplace safety and OSHA rules, subscribe to HSE Study.